My name is Liorena, and if you told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here talking about the last words my mother said to me, I would have smiled and said, "That's too sad a story." But stories have a way of finding us, especially the ones we never want to tell. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was gray, the kind that holds back tears, just like people do. I remember standing by the hospital window, watching the rain trace thin silver lines down the glass. The world outside felt like it was breathing slower, waiting for something it couldn't name. Mom was resting in the bed behind me. Her breathing was steady, but soft, like the sound of waves far away. I turned back and her eyes were on me. There was a small smile on her face, tired but gentle, the kind of smile that says, "I'm still here, but I'm also somewhere else." That's when she reached out her hand. Her fingers were cool, her touch light, and then she said, in that quiet voice of hers, "Promise me you'll be strong." I thought she meant strong like, don't cry, don't break down. But later, I realized she meant something much deeper. I grew up believing my mother was unbreakable. Her name was Marianne Carter, a woman of soft-spoken strength and endless patience. She wasn't rich or famous, but she had this gift. She could make ordinary days feel special just by being in them. She used to say, "Hope doesn't always shout, Liorena. Sometimes it just whispers." When I was little, I didn't understand that. I thought hope was something big, something you could hold. But as I got older, I realized hope is what holds you. Mom raised me mostly on her own. My dad left when I was 8, and after that, it was just the two of us. We lived in a small apartment in Portland. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like cinnamon toast and laundry detergent. On weekends, she played old songs while cleaning, humming under her breath, tapping her fingers on the counter. Those sounds, her humming, her laughter, are what I miss the most. One memory stands out more than others. It was a rainy evening. I had just gotten my first job after college, a design assistant at a small marketing firm. I was nervous, exhausted, trying to prove myself. I came home that night, threw my bag on the chair, and sighed like the world was ending. Mom was sitting at the table, peeling oranges. She looked up at me and said, "Long day?" I nodded. "You could say that. I think I messed up my first big project." She smiled in that knowing way, and did the world stop spinning? I couldn't help but laugh. "Not yet." "Then you're fine," she said simply. "You learn, you grow. That's all anyone can do." It's funny how her words sounded so ordinary back then, but now I replay them in my head like prayers. As the years passed, our lives settled into a rhythm. I moved out eventually, got my own apartment downtown. Mom insisted she was fine living alone. "I've got my garden and my cat," she'd say, waving off my worry. But 2 years ago, she started getting tired more easily. She brushed it off at first. "Just age," she said. Then came the hospital visits, the tests, the quiet looks from doctors that said more than their words ever could. I tried to stay strong. I really did. But there's something about watching your parents, your source of strength, begin to fade. It's like watching the sunset and realizing you'll have to learn to see in the dark. In those last weeks, I started visiting every evening after work. We'd sit together, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes she'd ask about my day. Sometimes she'd just want to listen to the sound of the rain with me. One night, she asked, "Do you ever feel like you're living too fast, Leo?" I shrugged. "Maybe, but that's just how life is now. Work, deadlines, bills. She looked at me with this soft sadness. Don't let life rush you past what matters. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. That Thursday morning, I walked into her hospital room with her favorite flower, white lilies. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of machines. She was awake, watching the sunlight creep across the floor. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "You look tired, sweetheart. Did you even sleep?" I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You worry about everyone but yourself." She laughed weakly. "That's what mothers do." We sat in silence for a while. Then she reached out her hand. Her grip was weaker now, but it still carried warmth. That's when she whispered, "Promise me you'll be strong." I nodded quickly, blinking back tears. "I will, Mom. I promise." She smiled again, closed her eyes, and said, "Good, because the world will need your light." I didn't know those would be her last clear words to me. That night, after she slept, I went home. I made tea, sat by the window, and cried quietly. Not because I was afraid of losing her, though I was, but because I realized how much of who I am came from her strength. Everything I knew about love, patience, and hope came from that woman lying in that hospital bed. And somehow I knew when she said, "Be strong," she didn't mean don't cry. She meant keep going. The weeks after that Thursday blurred together. Time, I've learned, behaves differently when someone you love is fading. It stretches and folds. One moment it's morning, the next it's dusk, and you can't remember what you had for lunch or if you even ate. Mom's condition grew unpredictable. Some days she'd be cheerful, joking with the nurses, asking for her favorite vanilla pudding. Other days she was quiet, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. And I pretended to be fine. I'd go to work in the mornings, smile during meetings, and then drive straight to the hospital, exhausted but afraid to miss even one moment with her. My friends started noticing. My boss pulled me aside once and said gently, "Take some time off, Leo. Family first." But I couldn't, because deep down, I felt that if I kept showing up, somehow I could keep her here. One night, it was raining hard, the kind of rain that soaks the city in silence. I was sitting in the hospital hallway, staring at a vending machine that refused to give me my granola bar. I laughed quietly to myself, that tired, half-sane laugh you do when everything feels too heavy. That's when Dr. Patel, Mom's physician, walked by. She stopped and looked at me with kind eyes. "You should go home tonight, Liarana. Get some rest." I shook my head. I don't want her to wake up and not see me there. She hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes rest is part of being strong too." I nodded, but I stayed anyway. When I went back inside, Mom was awake. She looked tired but peaceful. Her eyes met mine and she smiled. "Still here?" "Of course," I whispered. "You think I'd leave you alone with all these machines?" She laughed softly. Then her expression changed, more serious, more fragile. "Leo, I need to tell you something." I froze. The tone in her voice wasn't casual. She reached slowly to the drawer beside her bed and took out a small envelope. It was light brown, slightly wrinkled, with my name written on it in her looping handwriting. "Don't open it yet," she said. "Not until I'm not around to explain things." "Mom," I started, but she squeezed my hand weakly. "Promise me," she whispered again. "You'll wait." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, I promise." She smiled faintly, closed her eyes, and drifted to sleep. I sat there for hours holding that envelope in my hands, wondering what she'd written inside, and hating the reason she had to write it at all. Days turned into weeks. Mom's strength waned, her voice thinner each time I visited. There were moments when she barely spoke, just looked at me with those soft, tired eyes that somehow still held more love than I'd ever understand. One afternoon, I came in with a small gift, a framed photo of the two of us from my college graduation. She smiled when she saw it. "You look so grown up," she whispered. "You've always had that light, you know?" I laughed, trying to blink away tears. "You and your light talk again." She smiled. "That's what you are. You just don't see it yet." Her words hit differently that day, maybe because I was starting to feel the darkness she feared would come from me, the loneliness that creeps in before loss even arrives. One evening, while she slept, I walked outside the hospital for the first time in days. The air was cold. The city lights blurred through my tears. I found myself sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel, whispering, "Please don't leave me, Mom." It wasn't a prayer. It was a plea. But somewhere deep down, I knew she was already halfway gone. That morning, I arrived earlier than usual. The room was quiet, too quiet. Mom's chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing faint. The nurse gave me a look that told me everything I didn't want to know. I sat beside her, held her hand, and whispered, "Hey, I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open. For a second, I saw a glimmer of the woman who raised me, who danced in the kitchen and sang to old love songs. She smiled, weak but warm. "My girl," she breathed. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "I'm right here, Mom. It's okay." She looked at me, her eyes soft with peace. "Remember, hope whispers." Her fingers twitched once, and then stillness. The silence that followed was unlike any I'd ever known. It wasn't just sound disappearing, it was her disappearing. And I sat there, frozen, my hand still wrapped around hers, waiting for something to move. But nothing did. The nurse came in quietly, placed a hand on my shoulder, and whispered something kind that I didn't hear. I just kept staring at my mother's hand in mine, remembering her last words. "Hope whispers." The days after the funeral were the hardest. People kept saying things like, "She's in a better place, she'll always be with you," but grief doesn't speak that language. It speaks in empty chairs, in quiet kitchens, in the way the air feels too still. I went back to her apartment a week later to clean up. The place was exactly how she'd left it. The blanket on the couch, the mug on the sink, the faint scent of her favorite lavender lotion still in the air. I stood in the doorway and just cried. Not loudly, just those quiet tears that come from the deepest part of you, the kind that don't need words. That's when I remembered the envelope. It had been sitting in my purse the whole time. I sat on her bed, held it for a long moment, then opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter written in her familiar handwriting. The first line read, "My dearest Lyle, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to remind you that you're stronger than you think." I took a shaky breath and kept reading. "I know life will feel heavy without me. You'll want to give up some days, but promise me you'll still wake up, make your tea, and look for small joys. The smell of rain, a kind word, a warm light." Tears blurred the words. I wiped them and read on. "You've always had a soft heart. Don't let the world harden it. Strength isn't about never crying, Lyle. It's about letting the tears fall and still choosing to stand. And then, at the bottom, she'd drawn a tiny heart and written, "When you feel lost, close your eyes. I'll whisper hope to you." I held that letter to my chest, sobbing quietly. But amid the pain, there was something else, a strange warmth spreading through me, like she had somehow found a way to reach across the distance between life and death, to keep her promise of never leaving me alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every word, every memory, and somewhere between tears and silence, I realized something. She wasn't asking me to move on. She was asking me to move forward. There's a difference. Moving on means forgetting. Moving forward means carrying her with me, her words, her love, her hope, and letting them shape the way I live. The next morning, I went to her garden. The lilies I'd planted after her funeral were blooming. I knelt down, touched one of the petals, and whispered, "I promise, Mom, I'll be strong." The breeze moved softly through the leaves, and for a brief second, I felt something. Not sadness, not even peace, but presence. Maybe that was her whisper. Maybe that was hope. And if you're still here, listening to my story, thank you. Maybe you've lost someone too. Maybe you've had your own version of that whisper that kept you going when the world felt too quiet. If my mother's story touched your heart even a little, tell me in the comments. Where are you listening from? Sometimes it helps to know how far our little lights can reach. Because no matter where you are tonight, in a small room, on a bus, or lying awake with your own memories, remember this. You are not alone. Hope still whispers, always.